before. You've got the Groudon team, Charizard team on Matt's side with that Amoonguss, and then you've got Guillo's team with the Ferrothorn there. And, you know, they're both very slow Pokemon put on the team to do operate in a Trick Room environment necessarily, you know, and but do different things completely. The Ferrothorn really thrives off the rain because of the threat of those fire type attacks, and the Amoonguss can provide redirection support, which is sometimes a huge asset to have in some matches where you're staring down against some big special attack damage.
And just as kind of a general team building synergy amongst the 6 Pokemon, having those slower Pokemon on there, like the Amoonguss, like the Ferrothorn, they can be so disruptive if you're potentially coming up against a Trick Room matchup. We know, as you've mentioned, about Amoonguss being really pesky with things like Spore, and then being able to obviously redirect in attacks as well. But Ferrothorn, if it wants to set up something like an Iron Defense and then go for those body presses, there's not very many things that are sort of able to KO it, particularly when you're getting the defense boosts up. A lot of the time you rely on your kind of physical attackers, such as Incineroar or even potentially the Groudon, to be able to deal some damage against it. But if your defense is sky high, you're actually going to have a hard time taking down that Ferrothorn.
Yeah, so for Guillo here, you know, the win condition for him is probably get rid of the Charizard, get your iron defenses up, and then you win the game, because it's nearly impossible to take down the Ferrothorn without a critical hit at that point. So you've got clear win conditions, you know, if you're Guillo with that Ferrothorn, and that's the beauty about using that Pokemon. But on the other side of the field, it's not going to be easy, you know. You've got Groudon, you've got Charizard, and you've got Thundurus, all really threatening Pokemon to really have to contend with, and Pokemon that give Kyogre a pretty hard time. And, you know, if the speed controls are there from my side of the field, then it does make it difficult to operate, especially with, you know, the threat. If you've got one of your restricteds out, you've always got to have in the back of your mind that your opponent could just switch in their restricted at any one point and really disrupt your game plan and kind of quell any momentum that you were starting to build at that point in the game. So it is very difficult, and it'll be nice to see how both players kind of interact, especially in this game 1 where the information gathering here, I think both players are going to take it a bit easy going into this game 1. It'll be interesting to see if there is any aggression going into this first game, but I would imagine we'll probably see both players kind of just be a bit patient, see how the other player is going to approach this game, and then start formulating games, going a little bit deeper into game 1 to take into that game 2.
Well, let's jump right into the action and see exactly who's going to be victorious between Groudon or Kyogre. Well, coming out into the leads for Guillo, it's going to be the Incineroar and the Dragapult, whereas on the opposing side of the field, Matt, we're going to see Thundurus and Amoonguss.
Yeah, so some interesting leads here. You know, the one thing that you would say if you were Matt is, does that Thundurus have access to a dark type attack? Because if it does, it can really put on a lot of pressure, especially to the Dragapult. And because it's caught the Intimidate from that Incineroar on Guillo's side of the field, it has had that Defiant boost, giving it an attack, a +1 attack boost straight away off the bat. The Amoonguss, a nice option here as well for Matt, because it gives him the option to redirect, but has to be wary about a potential fake out from the Incineroar that could see fake out, double up with a max airstream into that slot and remove it quite quickly from this game.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of variables to contend with in this turn 0, and Amoonguss deciding to get in on out of there, returning to its Pokeball in replacement for Groudon. I really like this hit by Matt. Groudon gets onto the field unintimidated and can of course apply a lot of pressure to that Incineroar a little bit later on. Thundurus, however, going to be sitting pretty, having had its Defiant boost, so I would not be surprised at all to see this Dynamax up Lee.
Yeah, it would make a lot of sense to take advantage, especially of the Defiant boost. The one thing to watch out from Guillo's side of the field is whether or not that Dragapult has access to something like Will-O-Wisp that could really hinder its ability to be productive in this match, especially with damage output, because the burn will reduce its attack back down to technically -1.
Incineroar going to go straight for the fake out, just catching the Groudon on the switch in, and Dragapult is running that Will-O-Wisp, but Thundurus is able to avoid, so at least on this turn able to be able to safely fire off this max airstream into the Dragapult, and does a huge chunk picking up the KO. And I was about to say, the other nice thing is as well, with the max airstream, puts itself really speedy to potentially avoid even having to worry about that Will-O-Wisp on the next turn, but you can also just get rid of the Pokemon. That works as well to remove the threat.
Yeah, really punishing miss there for Guillo. You know, you need the Will-O-Wisp to hit in that situation, and the Thundurus freely getting away with that there, getting rid of the Dragapult. One threat gone, the Will-O-Wisp threat gone, and giving the speed boost as well to the Groudon now that's just come into the field. Like you say, Lou, a really nice switch from Matt. Getting in unintimidated is a huge kind of plus for Groudon, so it can start putting a lot of pressure now onto Guillo's side of the field. But the Ferrothorn coming in, you know, is going to be a Pokemon that's going to be able to at least take attacks better than some of the options that Giulio has access to. He's got sky high defense, so you know, if Giulio can maybe utilize it and get around potentially with leech seeds and start disrupting that way, it might be a way for it to kind of start making some gains in this match.
And of course the Groudons, they cannot primal revert in the Series 8, so you don't have to worry about Groudon, you know, getting that fire typing added to it, and also then running those fire type moves. Predominantly we see the Groudons running just, you know, things like Rock Slide and Precipice Blade. So Ferrothorn's having a easier time when coming down against this Pokemon. Ferrothorn, however, is not going to appreciate taking a max Knuckle coming out from that Thundurus, and of course this is going to boost up the attack stat of that Thundurus by another stage, and also give a cheeky boost to its partner Groudon in the face of this Incineroar, but Incineroar able to avoid out the way. Very weird considering it's a very big target right now, but you know, the stats do not change with the Dynamax, and is able to avoid critically that Precipice Blades. Max Flare is able to be the retaliation move of choice, going down into the Thundurus, going to be, you know, utilizing the fact the sun was in the sky, but of course Thundurus able to survive.
Yeah, and that's the big thing here. You know, the Kyogre are going to hit the field now for Giulio, going to be able to change the weather, but now the Thundurus in such a dominant position where it's got the ability to go for that max lightning into the Kyogre now and really pick up a knockout quite easily, and the Groudon with that attack boost as well. A bit unfortunate missing the Precipice Blades that last turn, because it would be a turn now where you'd probably be able to get rid of the Incineroar as well. But at the same time, with the speed boost that you've got on your Groudon, you're not so worried about the Kyogre being on the field, because if you can just get some damage onto it, and even if you see it protect this turn, the Incineroar is still in a bit of an awkward spot where it's not going to be able to really hit the Thundurus like it did that last turn, with the rain in effect now dampening those fire type attacks.
That is very true. It's hindering the fire potential of that Incineroar. But Thunder is going to go for the max lightning, targeting down into that Kyogre. So a wise protect there by Giulio. But you can see the destruction that's able to do thanks to those attack boosts, even through protect. That is going to be dealing a huge chunk of damage. The electric terrain is also now set around on the field as well, just as an added bonus. Groudon going for the Precipice Blades. Of course, not going to connect on the Kyogre, but does it connect on the Incineroar? No, it doesn't.
Listen again. So you see a max strike now, and it's a nice option, but if you miss the knockout on Thundurus, which you do, you are now lowering its speed but giving it another attack boost and empowering it up even further. And this is the last turn, Lou, of its Dynamax turns, so it is going to have access to things like superpower, which are a lot more powerful than what max knuckle is. It's capped out at that, you know, 90 base attack, so it's going to be able to do some phenomenal damage here, and also pick off the Kyogre now because of the protect the last turn. Giulio's kind of forced to go for almost a double protect and utilize the Incineroar to try and pick up the knockout now onto the Thundurus, and then try and maneuver around the Groudon, dodge some more Precipice Blades if you can, and try and close it out that way. But I mean, Matt has been very aggressive in the way he set up this match and really methodically planned it out very well, getting the Groudon on the field with those speed boosts, with that attack boost, and putting himself in a really dominant position going into the end of this kind of game one.
Yeah, and I think Giulio being unable to play around the Defiant ability there of the Thundurus just means that Matt's being able to capitalize on it. Kyogre going for the Protect, but to no avail. Thundurus is going to be able to target it down with a Wild Charge and pick up a very solid KO. I don't think any of us were in any doubt that Kyogre would fall victim to Thundurus's attack there. It does, of course, take itself with a little bit of recoil damage, and Groudon still unable to connect onto this opposing Incineroar. Even when it's single target, even in Dynamax, the stats don't change. The roll is still the same there on that Groudon. So absolute heartbreak. And I mean, it's just so unfortunate here for Matt. We've also been able to have a sneak peek and team preview of the item on that Groudon being the wide lens as well.
Yeah, I mean, the chances of it missing 3 times in a row are just really phenomenal in itself, you know. Really unfortunate for Matt. He would have been able to close this match up at least a couple of turns ago, you know. But still in a very dominant position going into the end turns here. The Incineroar not really going to have the attack power to deal with the Groudon. It's such a defensive kind of unit of a Pokemon. So all he needs is that one Precipice Blades to hit, but we do see the forfeit, and Giulio taking a bow there with his Incineroar that was only left. But like you said, Lou, earlier on, I think the way that Matt utilized that Thundurus in that game, taking advantage of the Intimidate to activate the Defiant ability and get that +1 attack, was just what he needed to kind of kickstart that game. You've got to say, though, that Giulio was very unlucky with the Will-O-Wisp miss as well. maybe if he'd hit that, it would have turned out a little bit differently. It would have meant that the Dragapult probably stayed around on the field for at least another turn, but it wouldn't have been as clean cut. You can't say the Will-O-Wisp hitting would have been the turning point in the game, but it would have made things a lot more difficult for Matt for sure. And he got very fortunate dodging that the first turn after the Intimidate was kind of there, and really punished him for the rest of the game, unfortunately.
Yeah, it certainly would have stopped the Thunderous from being able to get the momentum that it was able to gain in that game. And, you know, quite fortunately there for Matt, because let's be honest, the Groudon wasn't able to find its mark at all. So let's jump into game 2 and see if maybe Groudon, now that it's had a chance to recuperate after game 1, it's maybe able to find its targets with those Precipice Blades. Giulio going to jump out into the action game 2 here with the Dragapult and the Ferrothorn, whereas it's going to be a similar combination out here. It's going to be the Thunderous and the Amoonguss out there for Matt.
Yeah, now the tables are turning a little bit here, because you know the Will-O-Wisp is something that Matt is aware of now, that you know Giulio's going to go down that route to utilize against Thunderous to kind of not make it as much of a threat, and obviously not leading the Incineroar here helps as well, so that Defiant ability isn't activated. But the thing that Matt does have that he can take advantage of here is maybe a Rage Powder to like pull away the Will-O-Wisp, sorry. But the one thing is, if you're concentrating down on that Dragapult too hard, you kind of leave the Ferrothorn on the other side of the field kind of open and free for Giulio to do whatever he wants with. And if it does start to stack up those iron defenses, things get very difficult very quickly for Matt to kind of make a comeback, especially once the Ferrothorn has set up.
Yeah, and something we're familiar seeing when Dragapult first sort of jumped into our Pokemon games, the Dynamax Dragapult here up in action. You know, since the series have evolved, we often see other choices, so it's nice to see it here back in the action here for Giulio. But Matt's also going to be going for a Dynamax choice of their very own, and no surprise to see it's going to be that Thunderous once again, the Pokemon that really was so pivotal for him in Game 1, being able to capitalize on those Defiant boosts.
Yeah, and I think the big thing for Matt here is to try and avoid the Will-O-Wisp, which he's going to be able to do now with the Dragapult Dynamax, and not going to have the ability to utilize that move. So it makes it a little bit safer, and as we are going to see, the Rage by the redirection from the Amoonguss just going to protect that Thunderous even further here. But an Airstream coming out, and you've got to imagine with the Cobble Berry there, the Amoonguss will survive, so it's going to be able to stick around for another turn. But the Thunderous in a position where it has to match that Airstream just to try and keep up with Giulio's side of the field.
Yeah, I really like this play here by Matt's Amoonguss here, redirecting in any attack that Dragapult wants to go for. It really does compensate for both options. It knows he has the Cobra Berry, so it can survive that Max Airstream, and if it was the Will-O-Wisp, then that also protects the partner Thunderous there. The Airstream, like you said, Lee, it was critical for Matt to be able to match that. It's exactly what he does, dealing a decent chunk of damage in the process, and just keeping the speed tiers really neutral across both players. But Ferrothorn, we talked about this in team preview, it's going for that iron defense, and this is where things can get a little bit interesting. Ferrothorn known to be able to stack up the iron defense with body press and deal out huge chunks of damage.
Yeah, that's the issue here with the +2 defense stat now against a physical attacker like Thunderous, and like predominantly everything on Matt's team that we've seen so far. They're all the physical variations except Amoonguss, which can't really hit Ferrothorn anyway. So if you are Giulio, you know, going down that route with the iron defense, you get a couple of those up, you're going to be in a prime position to really start disrupting what Matt's game plan was that we saw in Game 1.
Yeah, and Incineroar jumping into the action here for Matt, which I think is needed. Although, obviously, the Ferrothorn is getting up these iron defenses, and body press is going to hurt the Incineroar. You need to try and hit it with fire damage as quickly as possible, particularly before Giulio has the option to bring in his Kyogre and protect that Ferrothorn even more. Dragapult once again going for that Max Airstream, boosting up the speed by one stage on Giulio's side of the field. But Thunderous changing things up and going for that Max Knuckle, realizing the threat of the Ferrothorn. But you can see the iron defense really paying off here for Giulio. It's able to take that really well. But I think the critical thing here is it is boosting up the Incineroar's attack stat as well. And that's going to be well placed to help the Incineroar try and deal with this Ferrothorn.
Yeah, definitely, and I think if you can continually go for those max knuckles, then that's ideal, because you're boosting your own attack and your partner attack up at the same time. But like you've already mentioned, there could be a Kyogre just lying in wait, and it's an easy turn for maybe Dragapult to get some last-ditch damage off here onto possibly the Incineroar before switching into the Kyogre. You may want to concentrate down onto the Thunderous. The problem is with Dragapult, though, as it goes for a max Wormwind, you kind of get punished because that Defiant ability activates on the attack drop that the Max Wormwind brings with it, so it kind of limits the ability with what Dragapult can do. And we are going to see Giulio go for just that Max Guard this next turn.
Yeah, Dragapult just taking that step back, going defensively as well as partner Ferrothorn. So Giulio just maybe wanted to stall out the last turn here of that Thunderous, but it's going to be another Max Knuckle. And as it is targeting down into that Ferrothorn, no point targeting a Ghost with that kind of move, is going to be able to connect even through the Protect. And I think critically for Matt, it's not about the damage here, it's about getting that attack boost. And obviously that's being paired onto the Incineroar. Incineroar, you know, looking to be in a good place here. It doesn't have to necessarily worry too much about the pressure of that Dragapult. And again, Incineroar is always well primed to deal with that Dragapult as well if it's got something like Darkest Lariat on there too.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, I think that the thing that you're now worrying about if you are Matt is the Kyogre switching in for the Dragapult. It makes more sense to switch your Dragapult out now. Get Kyogre onto the field to protect the Ferrothorn and maybe try and get a body press off into the Incineroar and hope that that's enough to pick up the knockout, because you should be able to take a Flare Blitz in the rain with the Iron Defense kind of already under your belt. It's funny to see a Ferrothorn there on the screen with the +2 speed as well. It's not really going to help it out too much at all, but you know, it might come into play later on this game. The other thing to consider as well, if you're Matt, is trying to get the Sun up onto the field, because if you can do that to further boost Incineroar's attack stat, that he's already had those boosts from the 2 Max Knuckles, then with the Sun on the field present, it's probably enough at this stage to get the Ferrothorn.
Now this is where all those speed interactions really do come into play, because the Groudon can switch in and set the Sun, but if Giulio maybe went slower, then the Kyogre would be able to override the weather, but that's not what we're seeing here. We actually see the Ferrothorn switch right out. Incineroar decides to come in and throw down and Intimidate against that opposing Incineroar, and also on the Groudon that also catches the Will-O-Wisp. So great targeting here by Giulio, being able to really apply pressure to this Groudon, essentially render it useless, burn and intimidated. Incineroar, however, on that side is going to take advantage of that Sun and target down into the Incineroar. Does a decent chunk of damage despite not being very effective, but I am sure Matt would have much rather that hit the Ferrothorn.
Yeah, definitely, but really great insight there from Giulio, you know, going for the Will-O-Wisp into that slot and switching the Incineroar in as well, which could be very risky, you know, especially with the Thunderous out in the field, but confident in the way that he would be able to get the Incineroar in and kind of cover that slot with the Will-O-Wisp anyway. And this time the Will-O-Wisp does hit, and it's onto a really important target in that Groudon that's currently on the field. And now you can see the Kyogre finally making its appearance, a little bit safer with that burn on the Groudon as well, and the rain protecting it against the Incineroar.
Yeah, the Kyogre coming in here just to apply some pressure to the sort of 2 fire types there that Matt has, because if you're able to try and remove that Incineroar, then your Ferrothorn's even going to have a better time of things. Fake Out going to find its mark there onto the opposing Amoonguss as Groudon goes for a Precipice Blades. It's still, there's a decent chunk there to the Incineroar, but obviously nothing compared to the destruction that we know that Groudon can do. But I think critically for Giulio, he's quite happy to take that damage because it now activates the berry. Incineroar's able to regain that HP thanks to its Citrus Berry.
Yeah, Matt's still not in a bad position though, because the Amoonguss here is really the one thing that can threaten that Kyogre slot, especially if we do see a switch into anything other than the Ferrothorn. The Dragapult can't really come in on that slot because of potentially a Spore putting the Dragapult to sleep on the switch in. And if you are Giulio, you kind of want to probably get the Kyogre off the field, because you know inevitably that you will either go to sleep. You might get a return of picking up potentially an Incineroar or a Thunderous on the switch in, but other than that, you're not really getting much of a return for Kyogre going to the sleep for the rest of the game. And if you want to preserve that, if you are Giulio, you probably do want to switch the Kyogre out here to something like that Ferrothorn. But no, just going for the Water Spot straight off the bat.
Oh, you can see the clock running down there as well. Matt really trying to consider what options he wants to go for, and Kyogre just making a strong decision here to go, why even bother looking at a move with that Groudon? I'm just going to KO it straight away and follow up with a Taunt as well, so your Amoonguss cannot get up to any of that status move shenanigans that it loves to get up for. You saw it going there in for the Spore, and again, being open team sheets, they're going to know that, you know, exactly what moves this Amoonguss has. They're going to be able to lock those all down, and now Amoonguss is going to be limited to its one sort of attacking move in terms of Sludge Bomb. That's the only thing it can do unless Matt can switch it out.
Yeah, so Giulio's play there makes a lot more sense, knowing that you've got the Taunt to kind of support your Kyogre. So, you know, the only threat really on the field at that present time was the Spore from the Amoonguss. Being able to kind of lock that out with the Taunt makes sense, and then you can remove the Groudon here. It does allow Matt to get the Thunderous onto the field, which is definitely going to threaten that Kyogre a lot more than what the Groudon was that previous turn. But now it's a kind of up to Giulio to try and get maybe the Dragapult back onto the field to utilize that Will-O-Wisp once again before the Thunderous is able to act on that Kyogre.
Exactly. We see another switch here as well with Dragapult joining the field, and I think Amoonguss wants to make use of its regenerator ability, switching out, obviously resetting that taunt as well, but also regaining any HP there, so it's a little bit healthier when it's able to rejoin. Incineroar joining the field here, mainly to pressure that opposing Dragapult with something like a Darkest Lariat, and Kyogre going to go for a protect, so Incineroar getting in quite freely here, managing to avoid any water-type attacks. Thundurus also going for the superpower into the Kyogre protect. That means it was pretty much a turn of switches.
Yeah, and you can see there that Matt may be predicting maybe a Ferrothorn switching for the Kyogre because of the threat of Wild Charge there. But the Dragapult now putting on a lot of pressure onto the Thundurus, and you can see Matt not wanting to toy around with the potential burn here, switching in the Amoonguss again for that Dragapult threat of the Will-O-Wisp.
And I like this here, bringing out the Kyogre. It just means that you can reset... I'm sorry, you don't even have to reset the weather, but it just means that you're able to have it to switch in a little bit later to maybe take any fire-type moves from that opposing Incineroar. Incineroar is going to be taking a little bit of damage from the Iron Barbs, and it's enough for it to be able to munch on its berry, the Citrus Berry, regaining its HP a little bit there, as Dragapult does go for the Will-O-Wisp. So really great switch here, actually. Amoonguss going to be able to not worry too much about taking this burn, particularly if it is to save its partner Pokemon here. So again, a few switches, a few bits of kind of items being utilized here a little bit more, but I think these last couple of turns, this is where things are really going to up in terms of the aggressive nature of play.
Yeah, and you can really see here how important the Dragapult is to kind of Julio's game plan in general, and losing it in that game one, how really bad that turned out for him. You know, you can see the utility of it in this game in particular, where it can come in, it can pressure the Thundurus and kind of stop it from being able to gain the momentum. And now with the rain up, with the Groudon gone, the Ferrothorn's in a great position to just start getting those iron defenses back up onto the field. And once you've got at least one of those, especially with the rain support, you're not really worrying too much about the Incineroars. But again, you've got to worry about potentially Thundurus coming back onto the field, and can you pivot your own Incineroar onto the field as well, because that's going to be the one thing that you're gonna look to really deal with the Amoonguss. But the Defiant ability on the Thundurus, whenever Matt brings it in, does kind of put you off being able to utilize that.
Yeah, that's true. Thundurus really hoping to catch and intimidate, but instead it's going to catch a Leech Seed here, so it's going to have its health dwindled away by this opposing Ferrothorn. And, you know, Kyogre's in the back here for Julio, and actually when you're looking, Julio's got a pretty healthy band of Pokemon there, able to give him the flexibility to pivot around his Pokemon and see exactly what he needs to kind of shut down the strategy from Matt.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you can do here is if you are Matt, you could potentially Rage Powder away the Phantom Force, or even go for a Spore into the Dragapult slot. We are just seeing him actually preserve that Amoonguss for later on and get the Incineroar onto the field, get an Intimidate onto the Ferrothorn, which is going to help if it's got any attacking options other than that Body Press.
Yeah, exactly. Incineroar going to join the field, but will take that Phantom Force. Going to be able to cope with it pretty well, and then again can apply pressure to this Ferrothorn going forward. Thundurus, however, able to catch the Dragapult with a Crunch. A really unique choice to have on the Dragapult, but perfect for this situation. It knows that the Dragapult is, you know, locked into that Phantom Force. It is going to appear back on the field, and it can pick up that KO as soon as it does. Ferrothorn, however, sitting pretty again to be able to go for that Iron Defense, boost up the defenses, and it's also got that cheeky Leech Seed onto the Thundurus as well. And Julio has the option to bring that Kyogre in and kind of help Ferrothorn a little bit more by negating the damage of those Fire-type attacks that Incineroar is capable of.
Yeah, and now with that Iron Defense, it really does get very difficult, because Matt this time around doesn't have the ability to use Max Knuckle to boost its attacks anymore, and I'm sure that Julio is not going to be bringing in the Incineroar anytime soon. Just biding your time with the Kyogre and the Ferrothorn out on the field really is what you need to do. Thundurus is still something that you need to be a bit concerned about, because of course it can really hit the Kyogre for very super effective damage. A Wild Charge is probably going to be very close, if not a knockout. So you can't be too careless if you're Julio, but the end game here is with that Ferrothorn, and you've got to really try and get rid of it as soon as possible, because another Iron Defense and that is going to be game. It's going to be too difficult to really deal with after that point.
Yes, and you know, you just have to make sure you've got a way to get around this Ferrothorn, but it can be so difficult. The parting shot here coming out, going to be able to allow the Incineroar to pivot out again, bring that Intimidate and potentially fake out as well later on. But I think you're right here, Lee. You know, Matt doesn't have the capabilities at the moment to be able to stop this Ferrothorn in its tracks. It's getting its iron defenses up. It's got the rain on the field there. It's sitting in a great position to start going for those body presses, and that's exactly what it's locked into here, targeting down into that Amoonguss. You know, not going to be very effective, of course, and Amoonguss is going to take its little bit of recoil here, but the more you can chip away at these Pokemon, sometimes that's all you need to be able to close out the game.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you know, you can, if you're Matt here, you can concentrate down on the Kyogre slot with your Thundurus, but then again, you're leaving the Ferrothorn kind of free to do what it wants, and that's the problem, you know. If you concentrate down on the Ferrothorn with the Thundurus, then you're leaving the Kyogre to attack, and yeah, it's a vicious circle, and it gets very difficult. You're going to see the Incineroar here switch in for Giulio and get the Intimidate off, but also activate that Defiant ability on the Thundurus.
That's the thing, it's like who to choose. Do I target the Ferrothorn? Do I target the Kyogre? So many options here, but of course Matt's going to be pretty happy that the Intimidate has come in. Thundurus now able to go for a Wild Charge. Not enough to pick up a KO on the Incineroar, but we know that is certainly going to be a threat for Kyogre if it is returning to the field. Ferrothorn, however, going, no. We're going to stop making you a threat, Thundurus. I'm going to body press into you. Again, not very effective against both of these Pokemon, but the damage is still, you know, being dealt out, and there's not a lot that these Pokemon can do in return to the Ferrothorn. There's literally nothing the Amoonguss can do for it, for example. It can't put it to sleep. It can't hit it with Sludge Bomb thanks to its Steel type. So really, if you're Giulio at this point, you need to start KOing the remaining Pokemon on Matt's side. You can kind of ignore the Amoonguss as best you can and try and get Ferrothorn here into an endgame situation.
Yeah, you make some really good points, and I think the problem there with the Thunder is taking so much recoil damage. Even if you go for a Super Power now into the Ferrothorn, it's not going to be anywhere near enough damage to pick up the knockout onto it, and the Iron Barb recoil will be enough in itself to knock out the Thundurus. And at that point, once you lose the Thundurus, if you're Matt, you kind of lose the game, because then you're left with Incineroar and Amoonguss, and you've got to contend with Kyogre. For sure, the Amoonguss can help you out in that situation, but the Incineroar is just not going to have the offensive threat or the presence, and you need to deal with the Ferrothorn even out of the rain.
Exactly. Incineroar just going to take a little turn of sleep, but Thundurus is able to go for that superpower. Targeting down into the Ferrothorn does just under a third of damage here, but of course Ferrothorn able to hang on with that, and the Iron Barb's going to be able to pick up a KO against Thundurus. So Giulio really in a position now where he's starting to whittle away at Matt's Pokemon. Ferrothorn able to go for that other body press. Hasn't got any other targets to go down into. Happily going to target down the Amoonguss that really can't do a lot in this situation at all. Goes for that Sludge Bomb into the sleeping Incineroar and will be able to pick up a KO, which means that Giulio is now down to the Kyogre and the Ferrothorn. But I'm not sure, with the rain up on the field and obviously the defense is up on that Ferrothorn, if Matt's going to be able to counteract it this late into game 2.
No, especially with the Incineroar at this point. You again, it's like choosing that which target do you go after, because whichever one you choose, the other one is going to punish you. You go after the Kyogre here with a Fake Out, and then you've got Body Press to contend with from the Ferrothorn. You go after the Ferrothorn, then you've got Water Spout to contend with from the Kyogre. It's a really double-edged sword, and it's not something that you're going to be able to get out of from this point. I think Giulio's really played the Ferrothorn quite well, extremely well in this match, to make it very difficult for Matt. And I think one of the keys behind that was the Dragon Ball and that turn earlier on where he utilized the Water Spout from the Kyogre to remove the Groudon and the Taunt from his own Incineroar.
Exactly, and you can see the double KO there coming out from the Water Spout. It's going to be a game 3 once again, Lee. I think we're having a lot of luck with our game 3s here and the European region final side of the bracket at the moment. But you know, I think you called it perfectly. That one turn as well, where he was able to get the burn across onto the Groudon and the Intimidate as well, really did kind of mean that he could breathe a little bit easier with his Pokemon, and the Dragapult really was a key component there. I think it's also worthy of mentioning that Giulio didn't really hone in on that Ferrothorn strategy. You could see it being set up quite early on in that game 2, but actually at one point switched out the Ferrothorn and went, you know what, this isn't going to work now. I need to save this for later. It could be my win con in the end game. And that inevitably is what it turned out to be. And I think it sometimes is quite wise. When you've got all those boosts up, it can be so tempting to stay there on the field and be like, I've got this set up, I don't want to waste the opportunity. But actually, you have to think turns ahead in Pokemon, and to be able to realize that's what you might need end game, eventually is what was able to win him game 2.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, Lou. Really well identified as well. And you know that the thing is, in that situation, you're thinking, well, Ferrothorn is set up now. It can just sit here and it can just win me this game. But it wasn't the case. You know, the Incineroar there with its attack boost, it was still a threat at that point. And I think the thing that Giulio had to keep in mind was that the Groudon could come in at any point and really start to disrupt things. And once that Groudon had kind of left the field, you win the Weather War. And if you win the Weather War and you've got Ferrothorn next to a Kyogre, it makes things very difficult. And utilizing the Dragapult and the way it was very risky that turn, because it could have really backfired, you know, where he switched in the Incineroar and Will-O-Wisp. If the Thundurus had stayed in there, got the attack boost, and the Will-O-Wisp missed again, you know, things go downhill very quickly, because the Thundurus starts to build that momentum very quickly and starts to punish everything on Giulio's side of the field. But thankfully it paid off for him, and you could see kind of the end game there kind of carved out, but very, very carefully played with the Ferrothorn. Not very, you know, he didn't want to just leave it out there. Very methodical in the way that he played it, and I couldn't have said it better myself. Lou, how you put that there?
Well, it's one game apiece, so let's jump into game 3, Lee, and see exactly how this match is going to go down. I want to see how Matt's going to counteract this Ferrothorn. Maybe that Charizard will be able to jump into the action. There's going to be Ferrothorn and Dragapult on Giulio's side of the field, and sticking with the same thing, we've got the Amoonguss and the Thundurus there on Matt's side.
Yeah, now, one thing that you could consider if you were Matt is potentially going for a Spore with your Amoonguss into the Dragapult, because you know you've got the Cobalt Berry. Even if it maxes this turn, you can guarantee you're going to be able to survive that attack and get that Spore onto it and kind of shut it down, which then frees up your Thundurus to do a lot more work in this game. Of course, by doing that at the same time, you're kind of giving Ferrothorn a little bit of freedom again to allow it to get that Iron Defense up or a Leech Seed up if it wants to go down that route. But at the same time, I think it's not a bad way to kind of approach this match with the Dragapult being such a threat, and you know, especially to the Thundurus here.
Exactly, you want to try and find a way to get rid of that Dragapult, but a way to get rid of the Ferrothorn is indeed that Charizard, because even though Ferrothorn is setting up those iron defenses, it's only boosting the physical defense stat of that Pokemon. The special defense is remaining the same, and Charizard, being a well-known special attacker, could be able to capitalize on that, particularly in the sun, and just sort of eliminate Ferrothorn as a threat. Giulio, however, going to stick with Dynamaxing up that Dragapult, so can apply some pressure here, being able to do a good amount of damage to something like that Amoonguss. But you have to be aware, of course, of the Cobra Berry on there, so if it is going to be the Max Airstream again, you know that at the first turn of Max Airstream, which is exactly what we're seeing, same as the previous game, it's going to be dealing reduced damage.
Yeah, and you know, you are protecting the Charizard, which is great, but I don't think that the Thundurus was ever be the target of the Airstream, which I think the Dragapult's kind of forced to go to almost in these games, because the Airstream, if the Thundurus does max, you've got to kind of keep up with that. So I think you're probably missing a little bit of an opportunity there with the Amoonguss. Although saying that, you've got Charizard in on the field. It doesn't care about iron defenses. It's hitting on the special side, and now you've got the opportunity to switch out the Amoonguss, and because of that speed boost that the Dragapult's just got itself, and given the Ferrothorn next to it, the Amoonguss is going to be the slowest thing on the field, so it's going to be the last thing to switch out if, you know, Giulio decides to switch out to the Kyogre here. So, you know, Matt putting himself in a really nice position, taking advantage of the Airstream from the opposing Dragapult and being able to utilize that Charizard going into this next turn, which helps him out, especially if he can get the Groudon on the field and get the Sun in effect as well.
Yeah, it is critical to be aware of those speed tiers. Like you said there, Lee, the Amoonguss having the advantage of being really slow here does give Matt that breathing room if he wants to switch out. Ferrothorn is going to switch out for Giulio though, however. We're going to see Kyogre here on the field, but I wasn't able to clock what moves Matt was going for here, and if that Groudon's able to come into effect, then the Sun will be the dominant weather force here. Of course, Matt as well still has access to their Dynamax, and it's exactly what we see being done here. I believe obviously this is going to be up there with the Charizard. I think it's been a long time since I've seen the Dynamax Amoonguss there, Lee, but G-Max Charizard are going to be jumping here into the fray.
I would have loved to have seen a Dynamax Amoonguss in this game, but unfortunately it is the Charizard. It is coming out, the G-Max Charizard, and it's going to start putting a lot of pressure onto Giulio's side of the field. The Dragapult here going to be able to pick up a knockout onto the Amoonguss. The Cobalt Berry has already been utilized, but it's going to be a Max Phantasm this time from the Dragapult. And the Amoonguss actually hangs on with 1 HP, Lou. That is a huge survival there from the Amoonguss here, and it gives Charizard that extra bit of protection going into this next turn.
Oh, what a good little mushroom, and a speedy mushroom to boot now. It's going to get a speed boost of its very own going down into that Kyogre. Does a huge chunk of damage, and I do actually like this play here by Matt. I was a bit like, oh, bring in the Groudon, that'd be amazing to see the sum. But Charizard's actually been able to get the speed boost up on Matt's side of the field, and with Kyogre being already on the field, it gives Matt the security he needs to switch out that Amoonguss regardless of its speed tier here, and is able to bring it into play so that the Sun is going to be on the field to help with that Charizard.
Yeah, not only that, the Rage Powder again this turn just further protects the Charizard. Full immunity from whatever the Dragapult decides to throw out at it. And you know, it's a perfect situation for Matt where he's still got the Groudon in the back, potentially. We haven't seen it yet, but you would imagine so. So it really makes it difficult for the Kyogre to kind of function like Giulio wants it to when it does hit the field. Well, a good counter here for that Charizard is, of course, the Electric-type Regieleki that's bounced
bounced joyfully onto the field. Amoonguss going to go for that Rage Powder. The Max Airstream going to come down and connect on onto that 1 HP is going to be more than enough to make it retreat down into its Pokeball. But I think Amoonguss really did its job there, and with the critical hit as well, you know, doesn't quite need that amount of power, but you know, just a little bit of styling coming out from the Dragapult. But I think the thing from that Amoonguss is it was able to survive on that 1 HP. It allowed it to have redirection on this turn, further supporting this Charizard, enabling it to be able to go for another Max Airstream. Particularly with the Regieleki on the field, you want as much speed on your side as you can get. Not very effective, deals a decent amount of damage, but gives Charizard now at +2 in terms of its speed. And this is the opportunity now for Matt, if they want to be able to bring in that Groudon and set the sun.
Yeah, but you've still got to worry about the potential Kyogre switching if you bring the Groudon, so it's maybe you want to hesitate here a little bit, because the Thundurus could be a good inclusion here, especially if the Regieleki wants to utilize something like Electro Web. Then you would activate maybe a Defiant ability on the Thundurus, and that would mitigate potentially any sort of Will-O-Wisps coming out from the Dragapult this next turn, because it has finished its max turns. Obviously the Regieleki now on +1 thanks to the Dragapult's last Airstream there, so maybe putting it still a little bit out of reach from the Charizard, but the Charizard in a great position now to go for its signature G-Max attack, you know, and start getting that residual chip onto the board, because that might be just enough to help him kind of eke this match over the line for him.
Yeah, and Charizard looking pretty healthy still, but actually just going to go for a Max Guard, wants to keep the HP as healthy as it looks right now. Dragapult going to go for that Will-O-Wisp and finds its target there on the Thundurus that has just joined here into the action. So unfortunate a little bit there for Matt getting the burn. Regieleki is going to go for the Thunder as well in Rain. That would have been able to connect nicely onto the onto the Charizard, sorry, but thanks to the Max Guard, able to protect itself. And the burn really coming in clutch there, being able to stop the Regieleki being KO'd by that crunch. That certainly does keep the Charizard in a risky position facing down against it.
Yeah, especially with Thunder as an option from the Regieleki here, it's going to be more than enough to pick up the knockout onto the Charizard, making it very difficult to utilize it here. You really needed to pick up the knockout, but the Will-O-Wisp there coming in so handy again to just prevent the crunch from taking it over the edge and taking Regieleki out of play. Now the Groudon has to come in for the Charizard here, you've got to think, but then does the Dragapult from Julio's side pick up on that switch and go for another Will-O-Wisp here? Because if it does, then the Groudon really isn't going to be as effective as it was in that first game, and it will be affected like it was in that second game where we saw it kind of subjected to that Will-O-Wisp from the Dragapult again.
Oh, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. The Will-O-Wisp is able to connect onto the Groudon as it switches in. These burns really are stacking up against Matt at the moment. Regieleki, however, isn't able to find its mark, trying to go for an Electric type move into a ground type, and will instead fall victim to the Wild Charge from the Thundurus there. So Regieleki, it wanted off the field, but it's found a different way off.
Yeah, it's finally off the field, so it makes life easier for Charizard. But the problem is, with the Kyogre coming in, now does the Thundurus have enough? Is it going to be able to pick up a knockout? The Kyogre's taken a good bit of damage already from that Charizard Airstream earlier on in the game, but with the burn onto the Wild Charge, you've got to wonder, is it going to be enough? We aren't going to see that. We're going to see the Ferrothorn come in, which is maybe a better option here for Julio, because with two bone Pokemon in front of him, it's not such a big threat. Of course, you need to try and get the Charizard onto the field as soon as possible, but by doing that, you're kind of subjecting yourself to Dragapult, maybe getting a sneaky attack into that Thundurus slot and doing some damage. It's really imperative going into the final few turns of this game.
And again, with Groudon and Thundurus not packing any fire type moves here, Ferrothorn doesn't have to worry too much. It could potentially just start going for those iron defenses and applying that pressure. That in turn, however, can of course force Matt to be able to bring in that Charizard. Charizard can capitalize on the fact that Ferrothorn's going to want to try and set up, and will then be able to attack it with one of those sort of heavy fire type attacks as well. Like we said, the iron defense doesn't really help it out here, but you have to worry, like you said, Lee, about the Kyogre there in the back, because that can change everything to do with weather. And I think that's why Matt, bringing in the Charizards, decided to switch it out for the Groudon, because it gives him the option to still bring the sun a little bit later on. Dragon Dart's, however, going to come out. The little Dreepies are going to get into the action and play as well in this Players' Cup match, doing a little bit of damage to both of the Charizard and the Thundurus. Crunch coming out the Thundurus, and you can really see the damage being reduced thanks to that burn. Leech Seed as well, going to add a little bit of insult to injury into that Thundurus, where its HP is now going to be dwindled away as it goes. And you can see the Solar Power on the Charizard as well, taking away some HP. And I think this is the issue you've got for Matt here, is all this residual damage that is starting to come into effect is going to start adding up.
Yeah, it's just chipping away, and it feels like the Charizard's probably in range to be knocked out by another Dragon Dart here from the Dragapult, and You know, you can switch in the Groudon again for the Charizard to preserve it for later for that Ferrothorn, but by doing so, you're kind of back in that sim situation where you're kind of facing down a potential Kyogre switching at any point, and that's really what makes it difficult. Now you've taken a lot of damage on your Charizard, you're kind of restricted in the amount of times you can switch back in and so freely as well. And the Thundurus, because of the burn, it's just not doing the damage that you needed to onto the Dragapult, and Dragapult kind of in its element here, being able to just really disrupt Matt's side of the field and kind of dictate and play almost with what it's able to do.
Well, Dragapult going for those Dragon Darts once again, going to be able to connect and do a little bit of damage to the Groudon, and critically onto that Thundurus to be able to pick up the KO, meaning Matt is going to be down to his last 2 remaining Pokemon. We're going to see the Charizard jump back into the fray, and that of course pins Matt down into an awkward corner because the sun will be up. Sure, Charizard will be happy right up until the Kyogre is able to switch on Julio's side and set the rain.
Yeah, and the weather war has been won here. Julio's got the option now, like you say, to switch in that Kyogre at any point it wants to overwrite the sun. The Groudon not really a threat because of the burn, and the Ferrothorn in a great spot. But also at the same time, the Dragapult, you might want to just protect Ferrothorn here, utilize Dragapult here to get rid of the Charizard for a turn, and then just seal things up with a Kyogre switch in to the Groudon after the Charizard has been taken care of.
Dragapult going for that Phantom Force so it can dodge out of the way of this Heat Wave, but Heat Wave is able to find its mark on that Ferrothorn, and as you can see, it does a solid one-hit KO there, removes it straight away from the field. We didn't see Kyogre switching in at this point. The Dragapult was just here to dodge out of the way, and of course is going to be able to avoid those Precipice Blaze. So Groudon, I think, is still struggling, even though it's a slightly different way here, Lee. It's able to not hit another Precipice Blaze, unlike game 1 where it just couldn't connect.
Yeah, it's got the ghostly spirit of Dragapult to blame this time, disappearing off the field, slinking away off the field, dodging those Precipice Blades. But like we saw earlier in the game, you know, the Dragapult, even if it doesn't knock out the Charizard here, the Groudon's slower than the Kyogre, so the Kyogre going to make easy work, and you would imagine the Phantom Force going into that Charizard slot.
And that's exactly what we see. Charizard is going to be able to be KO'd by that Dragapult, which leaves Groudon here to face down against the last 2 remaining Pokemon of Julio. But Kyogre is able to get in one step ahead with that powerful Water Spout, pick up the KO, and mean that Julio is able to win this match and remain in the tournament, taking Game 3 in this set.
Yeah, what a phenomenal game. Really backwards and forwards then, especially after how Matt came out in game 1 and kind of dominated. It really took the game to Julio. What a way for Julio to kind of adapt and come back. And you know, the thing is with Julio was in that game 1, we identified that the Will-O-Wisp was so pivotal. After that, the Dragapult was able to land those Will-O-Wisps, and you saw how important it was. So it even puts more emphasis on how much of a miss that was in that game 1. It allowed the Thundurus to kind of operate like it did. And then obviously with the inclusion of the Ferrothorn and not bringing the Incineroar anymore to activate those Intimidates, so just being a bit more careful with your Incineroar in the game 2 and game 3 made it a lot harder to function with Thundurus, especially after the burn kind of came into play there.
Yeah, Dragapult was amazing in that game, and you know, you might want to try and throw credit Ferrothorn's way for being that kind of formidable force setting up, but the real hero for me was definitely that Dragapult. You know, the support with the Will-O-Wisp, just being able to shut down Thundurus and Groudon in that game as well, and you know, on 2 occasions in the set, catching the Groudon and the switch in, it just meant that you were guaranteed the Groudon was going to not be able to deal as much damage in that next turn when it was able to attack. And I just think it was phenomenal play there by Julio, but again, you know, commiserations to Matt, they played really well too. It'd be a shame that they're knocked out of the tournament.
Yeah, real shame, because like you saw in that first game how dominant he was with the Thundurus. You know, it was incredible to see utilizing the Thundurus to its full potential, just really shutting down every single option. But it was just because he made quick work of the Dragapult, and like you said, Dragapult being one of those Pokemon that's been very good throughout different series in Sword and Shield, and it's not really had the best of starts in Series 8, but as the series has started to kind of progress along a little bit, you know, you see more players kind of relying on it a little bit more, and seeing a bit more usage of it. And you can see there why, because of how useful it is with tools like Will-O-Wisp to outspeed the majority of all these big physical threats in the format. It can avoid Fake Out because of its Ghost typing as well, and it's got the tools to kind of provide speed control support as well through Max Airstream, and then the Max Phantasm